The question of which experiences or statements are problematized and what it means to deproblematize them is determined by what someone finds useful and advantageous. If an experience or truth is not shared intersubjectively, it is not an experience or truth but a subjective opinion. This means we have a democracy in which what the majority believes to be true is true, and that can be the greatest nonsense. In Habermas, pragmatic, practical reasons lead to a recognition of objectivity and truth, but it is better to speak of benefit and harm, and not of objectivity and truth. Because this simulates an unbiased rationality that is not available. There can therefore be no question of a rationality with an emancipatory effect, because questions of validity and recognition must be clarified primarily in the area of ethics. Ethical and moral norms affect the social order as a whole and cannot be decided in small discussion groups, as there can only be one legal order. Ultimately, questions of emancipation are decided in Parliament, and you can see what the situation is with emancipation in this regard. Habermas pretends to fight scientificism by absolutizing the method over things, i.e., by wanting to create a formal method that works independently of anything. But with him it doesn't matter at all whether the method or the matter is made absolute, because the purpose and interest and thus subjective arbitrariness set the tone anyway. The concepts of truth and objectivity are, under other circumstances, exploited for a pragmatism of more or less accidental ends, which are claimed to have been guided by general interests and tested discursively, but in the end what matters is, which lobby has the most powerful influence. Instead of locating validity claims in ethics from the outset and clarifying them via a hierarchy of values that are generally put up for discussion and democratically recognized. The bugbear of logical rational knowledge is maintained in order to keep the myth of enlightened consciousness alive. But nobody is enlightened here because manipulation and therefore power determines what happens. If one sets aside the deceptive heading, truth and objectivity, under which Habermas talks about the tried and tested consensus, then Habermas' communication model is not that different from the local level rules of Lyotard's language games. In the end, pragmatism also sets the tone for Lyotard. What is missing in both, however, is the necessary reference to ethical norms, without which all pragmatism remains a mere power struggle, no matter what terminology Habermas or Lyotard use to gloss over their concepts. Lyotard believes that he can get by without overarching standards and regulations. In principle, Habermas considers such norms to be discursively redeemable, even if the process lasts until the end of time, so that it always remains just as a claim, and until then people are quite pragmatically satisfied with makeshift measures. Lyotard always hears the same call for order when Habermas tests interests for their generalizability in order to establish a general code of understanding and universally applicable norms. It is the desire for unity, identity, security, for popularity, the desire to find an audience and a public for one's own goals. Lyotard and Foucault accuse Habermas of containing material preliminary decisions in the formal requirements of his consensus process, so that he wrongly presents them as purely formal. It is Habermas' view of objective empirical knowledge, for which he demands recognition from participants in the discourse. Only those who bow to the unifying logic of a constructed rationality are able to reach consensus. Habermas claims that communicative reason does not refer to anything absolute. But his conception of rationality is nothing other than a supreme authority and judgment seat for this reason. It doesn't matter that he lets people vote communicatively within a discourse. because the result is clear from the start. It must comply with the given rules, which are created on the basis of a certain theory of truth, and the recognition of such a theory is only asked pro forma. Habermas later claimed that he wanted to escape the resignation of critical theory, but perhaps he just wanted to escape his own resignation, like Hume and Kant wanted to escape skepticism. Habermas wants to develop a theory of rationality with normative standards. But the only way to bring the two together is to view rationality and logic equally as norms of thought and therefore as part of ethics. The no contradiction rule, as a principle, is completely sufficient as a norm here, as long as it is not based on absolute standpoints, but rather on more or less arbitrary premises that are determined by a purpose. Only where rationality is not absolute and serves as intellectual integrity for supra-individual values, it is possible to ensure order through common ethical norms. Then all the arguments revolve around these norms. No universal objectivity is any longer able to obscure the interests of dominant power constellations. An unbiased examination of the conditions of a reasonable consensus then finds that objective, that is, subject-independent, facts or experiences are impossible and are based either on stupidity or fraudulent intentions. Habermas is of the opinion that philosophy has to give up its claim to be a basic science to physics and has to bow to the procedural rationality of the empirical sciences. In doing so, he shows his modern belief in the higher power of generality and laws made out of it. His consensus process has the purpose of simulating codetermination where there is no codetermination at all. Because the recognition of everyone is above the recognition of the individual, and the latter has to subordinate itself to the former. Habermas always wants to have been a Hegel Marxist characterized by pragmatism, but it doesn't matter at all what kind of thinking is influenced by pragmatism. Because this pragmatism is always just proof that a theory causes problems in practice, and that's why many compromises have to be accepted. Although his thinking is teeming with pragmatic subjectivism, Habermas wants nothing to do with subjectivist decisionism. According to his three-world theory, the individual in the subjective world is even a case for the therapist, so that only the social and objective worlds really count. In the scientific age, which was only able to gain widespread sovereignty over religious thought at the beginning of the 19th century, the idea of truth was linked to the concept of reality from the beginning. Differences were only gradually made. The idea of an identity of truth and reality included the idea that word and thing are viewed as equivalent to each other, that the word stands for the thing without rest, that the word clearly represents a thing, that the truth corresponds reality, and vice versa. This was only possible because people believed that they could perceive reality immediately, without any logical conclusion or other mediation being involved. There has been no reason to doubt that things have objective attributes and an immanent structure and order, and can therefore be regarded as unchangeable and permanent. It is best understood as a passive observer. Each perceptual opinion could be assigned the appropriate term and category. The basic idea of all modern rationality and knowledge is adequatio. That is, the correspondence between thinking and reality. As in botany, classification is used. The individual, species, are subordinated to the higher concepts of the genus. This scientific method has been given the role of a guarantor of reliable and provable knowledge, and the origin of this overestimation lies in the naively realistic superstition that reality can be grasped, as it is, through direct sensory experience. In 1797, Johann Gottlieb Fichte wrote in his First introduction to scientific doctrine. The principle of dogmatists is belief in things for their own sake. So, things in themselves, that is, for their own sake, only exist if the knowledge is subject independent. Subject independent means that it does not depend on the particular circumstances or the specific time and place of an event. An objective truth in itself applies in every place and at every time. A concrete incident that takes place in a certain place at a certain time becomes, by a generalization, something that can take place in any place at any time because a law is in effect for which the particular time and place do not play a relevant role. One believes that this generalization is justified because in all cases examined so far the same effect has regularly occurred on the same cause. From such experiences, an objective reality is concluded that obeys its own laws and that can also be recognized. Starting from this method of probability, which is quite suitable for practical purposes, the appearance of a rationally understandable reality is created and it is acted as if there were a natural order that can also be transferred to human conditions. In the end, the natural order is no longer distinguished from the political order and in this way indirectly confirms the prevailing conditions. Wildlife documentaries on television strengthen people's belief in the struggle for existence. Lyotard writes in his book, Postmodern Knowledge, on page 116. After reality provides the evidence for scientific argumentation, one also takes possession of the legal, ethical and political prescriptions, that is, the regulations, by taking control of reality. So the description of reality is sufficient to be forced to acknowledge the existing circumstances. Against such dogmatic and totalitarian realism, which is seen as the standard criterion for truth, knowledge and insight, Lyotard opposes the division of knowledge into different language games, all of which are independent in themselves. For Lyotard, the definition of the prevailing realism consists in avoiding the actual question of reality. The prejudice of a fact that is immediately accessible to the senses prevents this fact from being consistently investigated. Quite the opposite is the noble ideal of the fundamental absence of presuppositions, impartiality and unbiasedness of scientific research. The need for a justification for the transformation of non-objective sensations into objectified perceptions is simply ignored. The logical contradictions of a positive given are obscured and naive minds see no reason to be suspicious. This ban on thinking, at the source of knowledge, so to speak, creates an intellectual climate that no longer even meets the minimum requirements for intellectual integrity. Lyotard calls this a phase of slackening of modern theories. What should be self-evident, such as the insight that one can neither see, hear nor feel an abstraction and that the concept of reality is a construction with which a specific purpose is pursued, becomes by absurd reasoning so confused that even the simplest things seem so complicated that you believe to be faced with an unsolvable problem on which entire libraries are written about. As if the research of the last 200 years had never existed. The wheel of knowledge is reinvented almost with every generation, but ultimately only to prevent the validity of a logical generality from being questioned by subjective subversions. It is the old dispute between order and freedom, between generality and the individual, between law and arbitrariness, which remains undecidable through ever new obfuscation, to the advantage of the existing conditions. The question of power should only arise where it is legitimated by natural laws. This essentially practical aspect of order and security is then linked to theories that obscure the fact that ultimately it is all about not depriving the aura of rational universality of its persuasive power. In the spirit of abstract generality, attempts are made at every opportunity to produce something like a necessity for thinking from individual situations and essentially incomparable processes, and to simulate a logic that arises on its own, the evidentiary power of which then appears insurmountable. The abuse of logic and rationality in the service of power was already demonized by Martin Luther. For Luther, reason is a satanic bride, the highest that the devil has to hide his power interests. Derrida is of the opinion that an instrumentalized scientific technical reason supports religion and continues it through other means. For Richard Rorty, modern reason is a secular analogue of religion. For him, all philosophy also pursues a priestly craft, where it wants to give an account of the things themselves.